Hello everyone, it's Susan Kaufman. I'm here today with Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts webinar series. This is a webinar in our annual Success at School summer series. We have an extensive series of back to school webinars this summer, one every week, and I think there's a great selection of topics. Today we're talking specifically about preparing for college and really how to help your high school teenager with ADHD or LD prepare for the responsibilities of college life. Dr. Theresa Maitland, who I'll introduce in a moment, tells us that teens with ADHD are the fastest growing segment of students with disabilities on college campuses today. After leaving the structure of high school, the watchful gaze of their parents, college can be a challenge. Executive function challenges really, result in rocky adjustments and academic challenges, and especially in getting organized. The best way to conquer life in college with ADHD turns out to be preparing and planning while your child is still in high school. So Dr. Maitland is, let me introduce her. She's a great resource for us and has been super helpful every summer for the last few years. She is a senior ADHD LD specialist at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she is, and she is also the author or co-author of several books about college success for teens, including Coaching College Students with ADHD, a book called Ready for Takeoff, Preparing Teens with ADHD and LD for College, and another book called On Your Own, a College Readiness Guide. Dr. Maitland's email is on her slides, and she will also be available to take some questions on the Attitude forums. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Maitland. We love having you. So,
well, thank you.
Today's topic is, as I said, helping teens with ADHD get ready for college, and some of the things that Dr. Maitland will be touching on are how to practice advocating for yourself as a teen and how to use academic resources independently, how to practice college readiness skills at home, and how to slowly phase out accommodations that won't be available in college. It's a bit of a change there, and how to develop a transition plan. So let me thank, with a big thank you to the sponsor of this week's Attitude webinar. It is Landmark College in Putney, Vermont. If you don't know about it, you should visit their website. Landmark's been serving students with learning and attention difficulties with a huge range of programs, including an upcoming 2-week transition to college program this summer, July 21st through August 5th. They also have, for high school students, summer programs for rising juniors and seniors, and a wide variety of terrific programs for college for students. For their information about Landmark College's many programs for ADHD and LD students, go to their website. It's landmark.edu, and specifically you might want to check out landmark.edu/summer/transition to college program or other summer programs. So thanks to Landmark College. Bit of housekeeping. Dr. Maitland will take questions after she finishes her presentation, so please post your questions in the chat box when they occur to you or later when we get to the question stage. As always, you find the slide presentation available for download now if you want to print it out in the handout section of your control panel, and the webinar will be available for replay on attitudemag.com/webinar later this afternoon. And then a new feature of the Attitude webinars, we've created a forum, a thread in our community forums for this webinar specifically. If you go to our website and go to the community forums, just scroll down, you'll see it. You can post any unanswered questions here at the end, and Dr. Maitland will check back in the next few days and answer a few questions as time permits. So thank you, everyone, and let me turn it over to Dr. Maitland.
Well, thank you so much, Susan. I want to thank Susan and Wayne and Stuart and Allison and everyone from Attitude. They are so committed to this topic and they know how important it is. And I want to thank all of you who have taken an hour out of your busy lives to spend with us today. In the time that we have, my goal is to spend a little bit of time on why we need to be strategic and deliberate in our planning before and during college. From my anecdotal stories from being in a college now for 24 years and watching people transition, and also from the work I did in the last probably 10 years trying to read everything I could about what we know about college students with these differences, and then begin to talk about, I have 6 tips, and certainly there are many more, but 6 of the top tips that either those of us working at the college level would say are really important, or the research says, I'm going to focus primarily on tips that parents have more control over. These self-determination skills that researchers and people at the post-secondary level know are so important, and daily living skills. I'm not going to talk as much about academic skills because my experience has been that many times that's where families and schools have focused, and these other two sets of skills are sort of like hidden curriculum materials that I see as people adjust here. And as I said, I just want to take this slide to talk a little bit about the importance of being strategic. It may seem self-explanatory to you, and many of you have already sent young people to college, and maybe they didn't have differences, or they did. But every year, before I talk about what's out there in the literature, let me just tell you what I experience. Every fall, I get the great opportunity to meet transitioning students in my office. Right now in the summer, we're having summer orientation, and many families and students show up during their orientation to come meet us. And every fall, I get to see students who seem to be better prepared than others, and they seem to figure it out and endure, and I meet students who don't seem to figure it out easily, and some I worry, I don't know, did they figure it out at all, because I don't see them again. And it's been those contrasting stories that have led me to be passionate about this topic. We all know how important this experience can be to somebody's future, and as I started reading more and more to see if the patterns that I was witnessing were universal, what I learned is, yes, some of the patterns I'm seeing are universal. And one of the things I should say before I get into this is every student I meet, even the ones who endure, would tell you college is not for the faint of heart, especially a very competitive, large state college, that even the ones who endured have said it's been one of the most challenging things they've done, but they're glad they did it. I always say, if I had a penny or a dollar for every student who said to me, I didn't realize how different it was going to be. I knew it was going to be harder academically, but it's the difference that blew me away. So when I looked at the literature, I guess what I was surprised to learn, many of you may already know this, is our huge studies that look at college retention and graduation on all students are telling us that here in the 21st century, many college students, even those without diagnoses, do not succeed. And a statistic that comes up over and over again is some of these studies meet entering freshmen, and these are big, large-scale studies from different colleges, four-year colleges across the country. They meet them as freshmen, and then they follow them, and then 6 years later they collect data on who has graduated or who is still enrolled, and that's called retention or graduation. And what over and over again in the past decade, the research is saying 6 out of 10 students who entered as freshmen are graduated or still retained 6 years later. And those are not studies looking at people with disabilities. So many colleges have realized that the college experience is a challenge for all students, and they have geared up their efforts to do more at the college level to have supports. Studies about teens with ADHD and LD are harder to find. I was able to do a study here looking at 2,000 students with diagnoses and comparing them to 9,000 students. And even though we saw that 50% of the students were at risk for graduating and taking longer or having more struggles, having to withdraw, having to be on probation, what we were really excited about is 50% of them graduated in 4 years and had no unusual semesters where they were on probation or ineligible or had to withdraw. And again, research that is out there does say this population is at greater risk, and they may even have lower graduation rates, but there's always a portion of them that seem to do well, and that's where a lot of the researchers are concentrating, and that's where when Dr. Quinn and I started working on these books, we both focused on the students that we met who were successful and tried to interview them and their families to try to figure out why. And then we began to see that in the literature there's some similar patterns. And I don't want this to be a downer webinar. I want it to be an upper webinar, that there is a lot that can be done. The longer you have, the better, but you can still be coaching your young person when they're at college. So there is a lot that we know can make the adjustment smoother. So the 6 tips, the first 2 tips clump into this bigger category that I'm calling self-determination skills, and that's what the literature calls them. Let me back up and say, so think about when you think of somebody who's self-determined, what comes to your mind? The definitions are varied, but almost all the definitions out there say a self-determined person knows who they are, knows their strengths, knows their weaknesses, accepts and values themselves, and they can set goals and make things happen. And they know how and when to use resources. And one of the first phases in self-determination is knowing and understanding who you are and what your differences are. So if the first tip is one of the goals, and I'm sure many of you have been working on this, and if your child was diagnosed at a young age, you've been working on it for a long time, is how do we help the teen understand their strengths and weaknesses? And the first step is to really ask you, as a parent of somebody with a diagnosis or with a difference that may be undiagnosed, do you have a clear understanding of your young person's difference? Because even though as they become teens, they maybe don't want you to teach them, you are in a phenomenal position when these little conversations happen to raise like, I wonder if this is one place where your dyslexia is actually a strength, or your hyperactivity is actually in the way here, but I wonder if it's a strength when you're in lacrosse. You are in a great position if you can talk openly about those differences to shape your young person. I guess the next level, though, isn't just cognitive. It's your feelings about it. How do you feel about your teens' differences? If many times teens are going to pick up the perspective of their families. So unfortunately, we can't minimize the fact that there is a difference. And I know for a lot of families, just talking about that in the open with their teen is hard. And when we peel behind why that might be, sometimes people are ashamed or they feel guilty. They may have the same differences and they feel mixed feelings about that. There's a lot of literature out there that says if people with disabilities can reframe it and see a gift in their challenges, they tend to have more successful lives. And I would have to say that starts with us adults, teachers and parents and psychologists. Are we perceiving it as a curse? Do we see a blessing in it? I know there are people in our field who say there's nothing good about some of these differences, but I would beg to differ. That there's a lot of very successful people who have these differences. And I always tell students I've committed my entire career to people with these differences because I actually think you have more potential than other people. That doesn't mean you don't have more challenges. So I think you have to honestly look at yourself, and if you don't have a clear understanding or you're really locked in some emotions about it that make you see it so negatively, then I would say, how do you grow your own understanding? Who could you talk to? Did the psychologist who did the testing, did you feel a connection with that person, your pediatrician? Attitude and other big organizations have all sorts of interactive parent sites where you could grow your own understanding and acceptance. The second point I think I have learned over the years, having been in this field since it started, is oftentimes we don't balance our focus on the problems with the positives of the person. We do not want our young people to think they are their diagnoses. We want them to see that challenge as part of who they are, but are we spending enough time talking about and growing their talents, passions, and strengths? Oftentimes, and I was guilty of it as a teacher, I think families sometimes can do this, where as soon as you know there's a difference, you're taking the young person to everybody to fix the difference. But are you simultaneously looking at your child from a talent, passion, strength perspective and trying to figure out what is their unique gift? Sometimes those clues to it are hidden in the behavior problems you have, like if they're reading late at night under a blanket with a flashlight, is there some creative, amazing person there? If they doodle, even if they're oppositional, I always think about on my kindergarten report card, people said, Theresa worries too much about everyone else. And I say, people, that was my gift. Why didn't you capitalize on it and have me be a mentor to people? So that's a focus that's strength-based. And then if you have your understanding clear and your acceptance, then how do you create opportunities and a climate where it's okay to reflect on for your teen? who they are and help them grow. Certainly in those day-to-day conversations, if they'll let you, and I know that it can be really rocky with a teenager to bring up, like, I wonder if the reason you had trouble getting to soccer on time has anything to do with your executive functioning skills. How could we work on that? Like, to try to make connections. If they won't talk to you, I wonder again, who is it they will talk to? Is there a teacher in the school, a counselor? Who is the psychologist? Are there any support groups online or even in person for people, for teens with these differences, where they could feel more open to reflect on it, own it, and as I said, simultaneously, how do we give them opportunities to look at passions, talents, and strengths? There are some evaluation tools that are out there. There's books called the Strengths Quest and the Strengths Finder, where we use them lots of times with students to have them change the focus onto those talents and gifts that you were born with, and how do you grow those? So tied to self-awareness, right, and understanding and loving yourself is the next tip. How do you help your teen become a strong, independent self-advocate? Even the teens who are introverted, even the teens who are on the autism spectrum, who don't, it's not easy. How do we help them find ways so that when we're not with them, they can ask for what they need, whether it's in writing, whether it's, we have a very creative student here who's on the autism spectrum, and he and his mom created a pamphlet before he came to college to help him explain himself to people in the classroom and to our offices. And why is this so important? Many of you already know this, but some may not, is that there are some major shifts in the laws at the college level. And the laws at the college level that mandate that colleges provide certain accommodations require the teen to come forward and disclose their disability. Total difference from the K through 12 world, right, where it's the school's responsibility to find the people with differences, and the school, by law, talks to the parent. Everything shifts overnight when you unpack your child in August at the college, and all of a sudden, you are not the one the school talks to. By law, your teen has to come forward and provide documentation. That doesn't mean you can't coach them to those points, but the bigger law that sometimes is really surprising for parents is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. And that law requires that a student sign a release to allow their records to be shared with their parents, and to sign a release so people in offices like mine are allowed to talk to parents. That may be surprising for you. And even if a student has allowed that, and I have some students, and I ask their permission, do they want their parents to be a part of our meetings virtually or in person? And if they say yes, I still always, I do not like triangulate. I won't talk to the parent without the student, because the student's my client. So the norm at college is you are there, but you are not our main client. And legally, the young person has to be able to handle some of the things they need to do to get accommodations. So if this is new to you, or even if it's old to you, right? So how are you preparing for this change by fading your role? When I interviewed over 100 students that I work with who have been successful, almost everyone told me that their parents slowly got them ready to advocate for themselves. The words that we use in our book, Ready for Takeoff, are around the metaphor of piloting, and I think it really works well, because no one would let a pilot take a plane for a flight until they go through hours and hours of training with a co-pilot. So that concept of, like, if they're in 9th grade or 10th grade or even senior year and you haven't prepared them, how could you begin to say, starting this fall, you're going to come with me to all the meetings, because I really need you to be practicing these skills, because in college I won't be there. That co-pilot role is a safety net, because if the meeting gets murky and your teen doesn't know what to say, they can look to you. But soon after that, how do you say, starting next semester, what if you go to some of the meetings, and instead of me answering the questions you're history teacher has. I coach you to answer them, whether it's via email, or what if I help you set up your accommodations, because I know how I've done it, but you have to learn how to do that because that's what college is going to require. Several of the teens I interviewed told me that in their senior year, their parents actually practiced being at college. So what that means is they said, I'm not going to any school meeting. But I will be back here to coach you. And if there are clashes or problems, I'll decide if I need to be a part of that with you, but I want you to learn how to ask for what you need, whether it's in writing or in person, because you're going to need to fly solo how many months from now. And I always say, like, think about how many months till your teen will be at college, and think about how many weeks you have to practice this. That's the kind of language we want to use with teens. I'm not trying to be mean to you by inviting you to be a part of this. I want you to be ready because this is what college requires. The third tip doesn't clearly fit in daily living skills, doesn't clearly fit in self-determination, but it's really a knowledge piece that really could be helpful if a teenager isn't blown away by how different college is. As I said to you, every fall when people hit some wall and they're talking to me, this is their language. They say to me, wow, I had no idea how different it was from high school. And how can we help our teens learn more about those differences? I realize I'm not God and we can't practice all transition issues before they get here, but there is some information that would help them. So some of the ways that I've suggested and actually participated in schools or in families, one of the greatest ways for a teen to learn how different it is so they're inspired to stretch and grow in high school is if they hear it from somebody they trust and value, a teenager, not you or not me. So some of the schools that I've worked with have actually set up panels of their former students who were back for a holiday break. These could be the exceptional children's classrooms. Sometimes guidance counselors are doing it with a representation of all students, including those with diagnoses. And they really, the people who have just transitioned are the best teachers to say, this is what I've experienced at college. These are the things that I was surprised and challenged by. This is what I wish I would have done when I was a sophomore or a senior or a junior. You know that they will listen much more to somebody their age than they will to somebody like me or like you. So if we could have that kind of mentor relationship where it inspires your teen to learn how to go to their own IEP meeting, and it's not just mom saying this. If there are college-age friends in the neighborhood or relatives that your teen has a connection with, could you invite those people to come talk with your teen if your teen won't talk to you? And you might not clearly have the differences depending on the college you went to. Some colleges were smaller colleges and they weren't much different than high school, so you might not have the picture of what a larger college is if that's where you're sending your teen. I would say campus tours are a great way to learn a lot, and although most people wait till junior year to start doing them, we have a lot of people on campus bring middle schoolers, right? And actually in those tours, they're run usually by students, you can ask most admissions offices, could you also add to this a visit to a large lecture classroom, to a dorm, to the support offices? You might have to arrange that yourself. And to actually sit in on a 400-person lecture to get a feel for you and your teen, like how different will learning be if I choose this school. And then of course the best option is, could you have your teen practice some college readiness programs while they're in high school? As Susan mentioned, Landmark College has a range of those. There are others you could find by searching on the internet. Some of the creative ways I've seen families do this in our area is they found college programs in community colleges nearby or even our state colleges that were matched to their teens' interest. It had nothing to do with disability. Might have been a 4-week camp on physics, and it gave their teen the chance to live alone at college. They had to take a test, and maybe they had to connect with the disability office. Certainly programs that actually practice the transition skills are great, but if you can't find those, the creative parents I've talked to have created opportunities at community colleges or at state colleges to have your teen experience the college experience to the best of their ability. So now we have one slide dedicated to what I think is one of the most important hidden curriculum materials out there. It's the daily living skills. As I said, many times parents are focused on the finances of college, the selection of the college, and the academics. And because of how busy our lives are, thinking about how you're going to hand over the controls to some of the daily living skills sometimes doesn't happen until the person is blindsided at college that there's all these things overnight that I have to do on my own. In the books that Dr. Quinn and I wrote, we created a checklist based on research and our interviews. I should mention too, her interviews were as a developmental pediatrician. She saw hundreds of students, and I talked to students at a college level. But we also looked at the research, and there's other tools out there. If you search college readiness checklists, as I just did earlier, there were like 500,000 hits. Or you can just have a discussion with your teen if they're willing to talk to you, and if they're not, maybe this is where another person, a third party, just even to sit down and say, okay, how many months from now do you intend to go to college? Let's think of all the things in a day that I'm doing or the adults in your life are doing that we have to slowly hand over to you, because those are going to be expected of you because I'm not going to college with you. I've listed some of them there. I'm going to highlight some of the ones that I see really can get in the way. So the first one, for those of you who have disorganized people, some who may be diagnosed with ADHD, who have clutter everywhere, it may be hard for you to attack that because they may not have a need, but I have certainly met students whose roommates asked to be moved because after multiple discussions, the student that I worked with ADHD, their clutter spilled into the other part of the room. Learning ways to keep track of like your key and your cell phone and your one card are really key things. Like what are all the tools that are out there? There are some cool technology that you can put beepers on things and find them. So that's a biggie. I'm going to go right to the one that I hear all the time, caring for one's bodily needs and doing laundry. I'll bring those two together. Some of the students I work with who are on the autism spectrum or have ADHD or are very stressed lose track of laundry and hygiene, and it can really cause social problems. And learning to do the laundry and be consistent at taking care of your body may be able to be excused in a family, but socially it can really set people up to be teased. I have had many students in my office just in tears saying, why didn't I learn to do the laundry before I came here? There's so many things to adjust to. Now granted, if you ask them this summer to learn, they're not going to like it, but the students who have come to college having learned how to maintain their own personal hygiene, do their own laundry, even if they practiced it just for a month before coming, they actually have sometimes shared to me how they resisted it and how glad they were because it was something they had to figure out in addition to adjusting to being away from home and all these other tasks. The two that show up a lot under care for one's bodily needs, medication management. Of course, that's a huge one. I meet hundreds of students who have never managed their own medication, and overnight they're going to need to manage it in college. And slowly handing that over can really be helpful, even to the point of ordering their own prescription. Again, I have had people have a meltdown because for the first time in their life, they have to order it themselves. They may be from another state and their parent, they have a doctor here, they have to find a doctor here to manage it. There's a lot we can do to help people decide to take that over. Do they value their medicine? Do they know what it does? Do they need to go meet with the doctor themselves? And then the sleep routine, waking yourself up in the morning is a huge skill at college. And as you may know, because you live with young people with these differences, for some people this is part of their difference is they have sleep issues. So managing their own emotional needs and stress level in a productive way, my 2 cents on this is if that really is a big issue for your teen and they're not getting some help from a therapist or a counselor, if they are using substances to handle stress level, all those things that are maybe rough edges now, you could anticipate they could get worse. So having the ability to have that attacked before college so that there can be growth in that area will really help, even if it's just learning meditation or how to build an exercise into their lives. So those daily living skills are really strategically thought about. But again, in the students that I interviewed who were successful, their parents and they actually created little goals every semester and handed over the controls for these skills. Another tip, which can always be controversial for me to talk about, is we really do need to think about the accommodations that young people are getting in the K through 12 world, because they may not be available at college. And that again can be shocking for families to learn. I'm going to go to the third bullet point of the slide and talk first. Why do we need to think like this? And as I say there, be careful what you ask for in the K through 12 world, because you will probably get it because the laws are on your side and nobody wants a lawsuit. But to have the long view, I want you, if you don't already know this, it's important to know that colleges are mandated only to provide reasonable accommodations that don't fundamentally alter the course or degree requirements. They are not mandated to provide learning centers or group supports like we have in our university, although more and more are doing that. But they are mandated to have an office that will provide things like extended time, note-taker assistance, audio books, perhaps priority registration to help people arrange their schedule. And the colleges have the right to say, yes, like if a college says foreign language is a requirement, they have the right to say that, even if your child had foreign language waived in high school. So knowing that there will be degree requirements and program requirements that may not be modifiable. So for example, the thinking I always have is certainly accommodations are needed as young people are growing, and for some people they may be needed throughout their lives. But accommodations typically change the environment and they don't grow the young person's skills. Years ago in the special ed world, more of our programming did both. When I was training teachers, we would teach them about, yes, we want to give the student extended time for that test, but we also want to teach the skills of managing time during a test. The programming and the staff availability in our schools, unless you're in a unique setting, don't always do both anymore. What happens in college, and I'm going to just share maybe 2 or 3 of the accommodations that backfire. I still do meet students who get unlimited time on tests, and that is probably not going to fly at any large college in the country. There may be innovative, more unique colleges that don't value time and tests, but that's sort of the culture in college. I meet students who have been given the opportunity to correct their test after the fact, and then their grades are averaged. I met one professor in 23 years that has that opportunity in his chemistry class, but pretty much the test is going to be your grade. Not being downgraded for spelling errors is common for people with dyslexia. That can backfire if you're taking a class like a student I had who went on to pharmacy school. The degree requirement was to spell the prescription drug medications correctly for the test. And it was a fundamental alteration of their course curriculum for him to ask to spell those correctly. As it was the med school student I had who was used to double time for everything, and he wanted double time for his physical exams. The med school said, no, that is a fundamental role of a physician. We'll help you learn how to do that, but we can't alter it. So just be aware every time we ask, is it something that is going to be not available at the college level? And why can't we work with our schools to simultaneously grow the skills that go with the accommodation? That will serve them in the long run. And if after all this, now we have to think about how do you develop a strong transition plan? And some of you, I'm sure, have already done this, and you could be leading the webinar. But I think our first question has to be, is college really the next best step? And do we really have data that tells us that this young person is ready to be on their own, living on their own at a typical four-year college? Hope is never a plan. Like hoping they'll get it together can backfire. Maybe that works for people who don't have executive functioning differences, but for people with differences, the struggle might not make them kick in the motivation to change. It might overwhelm them. And not to mention what a huge investment college is and the cost. And I think it's okay for you to be thinking this way, to say this is a really huge investment and we want to really have the best shot for our young person. And when they're not ready, there can be major consequences in terms of emotional stress that can last if people have trouble adjusting to college. So I think it's okay for us to raise teens in our families and in schools, like let's really think about all the options that there are right now. You could work and save money so that you could pay part of your own college. That's one idea. Or you could just work. Maybe you have a young person whose passions and talents match a certain field, and they would rather go to a technical school that matches culinary interests. Or is a two-year college where they live at home or a vocational technical training option really a better choice? Because I have met students in their 20s who did not succeed at college and they don't want to go back to college. Many of them, because of their reading or learning disabilities, they hate sitting all day. They hate the expectations here. They want to find a place where their talents match, like in a garden center, maybe as a landscape architect or doing something different. Military, a gap year. I've seen people do a really interesting thing where they took a year off. Their young person committed to maybe taking one class for credit at a community college, not entering in any degree, but they agreed to grow their self-determination skills, or they did a really unique project in their community or in the country or for their church. I have also met people who tried college and failed miserably, who came back later in life and they succeeded just tremendously, partly because their brains were more mature and they had the motivation and all the skills. So if you're still thinking, yes, it is the next step, then on our resource list, I've listed there is a large guide that you can use, and there's certainly other resources to help you pick a college based on supports. Not just the disability supports, but all the supports available to students. Many colleges have first-year supports for all first-year students, learning centers, writing centers. The more that's there for everybody, the more chance your young person will use it, because if it's tied to a disability office, they may not use it. Create or attend a summer bridge program. Many colleges have, if you select a college, they may actually have a special transition program for certain minority students, including students with differences. Sometimes colleges don't have, and what that means is the student comes to the campus in July and takes courses during the second summer session before fall starts, gets credit, and actually gets to figure out college before it gets crazy and chaotic. And when students with disabilities have done that, they use that time to learn how to advocate for themselves with the disability office, use the services. So either those exist or you might create your own. Connect your teen to the supports that are there. Many of the most successful families have made sure their teens met everybody in all the offices. It's a tricky thing because you can't control them going, but you can play a big role in connecting. Many teens have asked their parents to help them make the appointments for the first month to see us as at the Learning Center, because they're so overwhelmed they can't remember how to do that. And then selecting a wise first semester. If your teen doesn't tell the advisor that they meet in their college orientation that they have a difference, they may be given a typical schedule that is just not matched to them. So how do you take your first schedule and match it more to your strengths, knowing that the transition might be hard? And working as a family, and you might need a third party to do this, to really design together your transition plan. Like, what are your expectations for communication? What role does your teen want you to play? What do you need to do? Like, do you need to have at first texts every day to know they're okay? Having that and then revisiting it after your teen is adjusting and their needs change. So that's a lot to share, and I'm going to jump over these next two slides, and Susan and I will come back to them, and move into hearing what's on your mind.
Theresa, that was just really fascinating. Thank you so much. We've got lots of good questions here. I'm going to jump to one that is not about high school, but it seems important to a number of people listening in, and I know from my own personal experience that it's a significant one, and that is, I'll quote from Michelle, my child is really, really smart, but he hates going to the disability office. I think he hates it because it makes him feel different. Another person says, how do I encourage my child in college to use the recommended accommodations? We have the diagnosis, but they're very apprehensive about actually going to the office. My daughter's in jeopardy of losing her scholarship. So you mentioned this, but to come back to it, you know, should parents approach this issue of encouraging their children to take full advantage of what is available at their school?
That is really the hard reality of where families are at the college level. I'm going to answer that, but let me go back to the high school level, because one of the ways, if for those of you who aren't Michelle and the other people who you still have time, many of the students I see who resisted getting help at the college level tell me that they wish their parents would have let them fail in high school so they acknowledge their difference and their need for accommodations. So that, I guess the one thing to think about is if you've never really had a failure experience, it's very possible that the young person doesn't really own the difference, which is why my first tip is about how do you come to acceptance. But I certainly understand that the position that the parents of college students is in, I think there's very little you can do, except there is something you could do. I think that I'm thinking of some of the students who did actually flunk out several times because they refused accommodations. Their parents had therapists who helped them communicate with their teen to say, you know, I cannot make you go to that office, but our family's reality is we can only pay this much more for college. Like sort of giving people a bottom line about your finances. Especially, let me just say, I'm assuming that your young person would be helped by going to the office. Now, I meet many young people who do not register with the disability office because they tell me it's not about extended time. It's not about a note taker. I need coaching to learn how to manage my life. So the first question is, do they really need those accommodations? Are they getting in academic jeopardy? That would be, and then if they are getting in academic jeopardy, what is your bottom line as a family for funding college?
Right.
To some degree, there is pretty much nothing a parent can do to force somebody to use an office. But each young person, that's why the very first slide I say is, how do we help them come to their own acceptance that they are different, and there may be, that's not bad, and the difference is not something to be embarrassed about. That most families have come to that, but their young people haven't. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I have seen many families allow their young person to fail at college, only to have the young person want so badly to come back. And then in the contract for letting them come back, they have agreed to use accommodations. So I know there's no easy answer to this.
You're right. A number of people are chiming in. Alan says, you know, some students feel that using an accommodation is, quote, not fair. How do we help them understand that it's not only fair, but it levels the opportunity? Other people say, yes, this is very indicative of not really accepting their differences. So I think you're onto something with the self-acceptance, self-knowledge component of this.
With that said, let me just say the way that colleges deliver accommodations and the fact that we don't practice it in high school makes it harder for the young person. But for example, I meet a lot of students who wear glasses, and when they tell me it's an unfair advantage for them to have extended time, I will say, take your glasses off and try to read my board. And what if I said to you, try harder to read that board? And they'll say, well, I can't do it without my glasses. I try to reframe for them that the extended time is glasses for their brain, and that it's not a sign of them getting an unfair advantage. But each young person has to come to that on their own, and it is painful to watch when they are resisting it.
Right, right. Interesting question here says, what if your teen believes they're absolutely ready for college, but you know that they're not? What then?
Well, that's a really good question. I wish I could talk to you because how do you have that discussion in a very productive way? And how many
Right, if
months?
people are
Yeah.
asking for help with the communication strategy, how do you talk about this? Right. Yeah.
Sometimes people really need a third party, and it might be that it's worth the money to hire a counselor, therapist, coach to help you communicate. Um, and to get specific on why you're thinking they're not ready and why they are thinking they are, and where do you have common ground. And what, again, since you are the parents and you're funding the college, what is it behaviorally that you want to see happen in the next semester or in the next year that will make you feel confident funding college?
Okay.
But I do think sometimes people really need a third party to break that stalemate. Sometimes the checklists that are in our books, I've gotten feedback from some parents that that checklist has been a non-emotional way for them to sit down and say, well, I rated you a 2 on this and you gave yourself this, and here's why I see it. But if you have a rocky communication, you're going to need help with.
Right. So are you thinking an ADHD coach possibly? There are a couple of people who have asked about that. Can you see a coach helping with the transition?
Many families will outsource the college readiness plan with an ADHD coach, which is a great idea. Most coaches want to work more directly just with the student, but some coaches will, because the parent is a key part of the growth process, will invite the parent into part of the interaction. And coaching is going to be different than therapy. Coaching is going to be real practical.
Right.
But yes, definitely a third party like a coach. If the emotional communication is really, really extreme, most coaches aren't, unless they're also therapists and psychologists, may not have the tools to break loggerheads, but they certainly can help help people come to a common ground and say, these are the things that, what I'm hearing your mom saying, these are the things that I know are important for college. What are you willing to do?
Okay. Here's an interesting question from John. He said, do you know of any YouTube kind of presentations in which an ADHD college student describes their day and what they do to make it work? That would be very valuable, wouldn't it? If there was such a thing.
Right, I search YouTube all the time. I have not found something specific. Now, on my resources, there's the University of Washington's transition program. It's called Do It. They do have a lot of videos of people with all different disabilities talk about what they went through. I used to have really good interviews with college students with ADD and LD, but when we changed our website, those videos got lost. But I think we're all searching for that. If he finds them, John, let me know, because I'm always looking for videos because teens won't read.
Right. You mentioned a checklist, your checklist. Can you talk more about that where that is and some of the components of it?
Well, as I said, I think it's not the only tool to use, but we tried to create a checklist that's one for parents. It's called the College Readiness Checklist, and one for teens. And it's broken into the 3 categories of all the college readiness skills: self-determination skills, daily living skills, and academic skills. And pretty much skill by skill, the parent or the teen is asked to think about, in the last 6 months, how would you rate your performance of this skill on a Likert scale? And you get a total, and it's not about are you ready or not, but you can get a percent. But the goal is to look at which readiness skills have you mastered already, and which ones do we agree as a family you really need to work on before you go. And how could we, in the time we have, take one a month, take one a week, and if we have the ability to communicate with you, how could we make a plan that I'm going to get out of the driver's seat on waking you up? Right. As I said, there are some out there, and I tried to find, Landmark had one that I didn't see on their website, but the University of Penn has it on their website that's out there in the public domain. Ours is in the 2 books, and we cannot give permission to share that because it's under copyright through APA.
Okay, and Dr. Maitland's books. And you want to repeat just again the title of a book with that you find the most useful for people if they want to invest in a book of
Well,
your books,
well,
which is
there's
the one.
two, right. There's one for parents called Ready for Takeoff, preparing teens with LD and ADHD for college, which has in it the readiness checklist, but it also tries to bridge the gap for parents to teach a coaching approach to parenting, which is
Mhm.
really what we all have to be doing with these young people who don't have executive functioning skills. And the second book is called On Your Own, a college readiness guide for teens with LD and ADHD, and it's the companion book for the teenager.
Got it. Okay, for teens. That sounds super helpful. Um, let's see. I'm just going to post that to the list, those titles. Great. Let's see. 6 people are asking. Let's see. Coaching has significantly helped my students that are in college over the summer. Do you think that continued coaching via Skype during the same year is a good idea?
Well, I'm assuming that the person asking thinks so. I would say I wish all transitioning students with or without disabilities had a coach during their first semester of college.
Okay.
There's actually a big study out there that was done by a company called Inside Track, and they did just that with thousands and thousands of transitioning freshmen. Half of them had once a week, 30 minutes a week coaching, and half did not. For the first semester, and these were not people diagnosed, and they did find that the coaching improved greater grade point averages, better graduation rates years later. I tell every student I meet at orientation that if I had a magic wand, I wish they would make weekly appointments with either a coach on campus or someone in the community. And Skype and FaceTime, we offer that to our students here because, believe it or not, they don't want to walk across campus to our building. So, right, just the opportunity. And in the book, Ready for Takeoff, the last chapter, Dr. Quinn and I talked about success stories. And all the students we've met who were successful had somebody. It might not have always been a coach, could have been a therapist, it could have been an advisor. They had somebody during their transition that wasn't a parent that they talked to weekly that helped them process the changes, help them problem solve how to handle it, and help them find the resources. There's tons of resources, but they're not always apparent. So I am with that person that I think the best time to have those resources is during that adjustment because we can anticipate it's going to present new challenges.
Right. Okay. Here's the $64,000 question from the listeners. How do they find a person, a coach?
I'm not sure if I put this on our resources list. There is the ADHD coaching organization. That,
ACO.
ACO, yes. There's also the EDGE Foundation, which I don't know if your viewers know about. The EDGE Foundation is a nonprofit organization that is committed to providing coaching to high school and college students, and they provide virtual coaching. So those two huge organizations can help you find coaches. There's also the possibility of checking with your colleges, your state colleges near you, or even your private colleges, their disability offices, because they know the local coaches.
Right.
And let me just say, our university, we have adapted, our entire learning center uses a coaching model for all students. And we've just this year finished a study on the impact of academic coaching on first and second year students at our college, because we think not only did we see it impact the people with differences, but because transition is so challenging for everybody, it's our model for everybody.
Interesting. So it's a support. It's an encouraging support, right?
It's an encouraging, specific. I always say it's a time and place for the young person to think and reflect on their goals, their plans, and how they're matching up to them, and to get some input from a objective party. Coaches don't tell people what to do, but they help the student think through themselves, practicing those executive functioning skills. And the coach certainly will have suggestions and guidance that could cut corners for young people as they're making these adjustments.
So I just wanted to mention that Attitude has a directory. It's called, the Attitude directory. There are a lot of coaches in it. I think Chad has one as well, and probably ADA, the Adult Attention Deficit Disorder Association. So there are online directories for ADHD coaches that you should definitely check out. Theresa, you mentioned your resource list. Is that as part of your presentation that's available to the listeners by downloading? Here it is. Okay.
Yeah, I did have ADHD Coaches Organization, the Edge Foundation, and then three national resources on transition. Yes.
Okay, transition. So, and you want to just talk briefly about your upcoming webinar? I think everybody should know about that as well.
Yes, every fall the University of North Carolina offers a seminar and a webinar with a national expert on attentional or learning issues, and ours this year will focus on high school and college students with dyslexia, and the webinar platform that we use can handle a pretty big number. So people who don't live locally, if you have a teen or a college student with dyslexia, we are really fortunate to find Dr. Marianne Wolf, who's one of the top researchers in the field, who has an amazing perspective from a scientific standpoint on the beauty of dyslexia. And she's going to share what has been learned about the uniqueness of the dyslexic brain and the talents that tend to go with dyslexia and how to foster those, and specifically how to help college and high school students who have this as one of their diagnoses to be successful in a reading intensive world like high school and college. So our registration is not going to open until August 8th at that address that is on that slide.
Okay, great. Last question. Someone said I have 6 weeks until I drop off my son. What's the top thing that I should be doing?
I feel your panic. So one thought I have, what would it be like to talk to your teen and have that conversation together, and maybe have them watch this webinar or just have a discussion with you and say, we have 6 weeks, and you don't just have 6 weeks. Let's be honest, with technology, the research on the amount of interaction that this generation has with their parents says they text parents 3 to 5 times a day. Oh. So think about the fact that it isn't 6 weeks. You have more time. And to have a discussion with your teen and say, so we have a great golden opportunity, help you be more ready. When you think about going to college, what are you excited about? What are you concerned about? What skills am I taking over that you want to work on? And here's the ones I think. I think having that as like just an open, not panic discussion. And then also saying, once you're in college, I'm not gone, too. And I have had students rely on their parents in really creative ways until they adjusted. So having that discussion with your teen. If you haven't already had your teen register for the disability office where they're going to college, get on that, because that would be, even if they don't use it, here's the thing, it's insurance. Even if they don't think they're going to use it, it's helpful to be registered, because if they choose to use it and there's a backup in reviewing documentation, your teen might not be able to get the accommodation. And
right, and just from my experience, it's not a small process. There were a lot of forms involved in registering with the disabilities office. Yeah, that was a big pile of paperwork. So and really asking them what are the things that they think might be challenging, and let's look to see what offices are on the campus that could help you, and when we move you in, let's make appointments to see if we can go meet them. Okay, yeah, that's a great idea. I think we did that. We visited the disability office during the accepted student visit, and then we also went back during orientation. So, but that said, we still had problems with actually using the services. But we did. Yeah.
Well, that's why I'm saying go beyond the disability office to say what's all the resources in the dorms for first-year students, and if your teen wants to shy away from the disability office, what else is there that all students can use?
Okay, like there oftentimes a writing center or other tutoring centers and learning centers, right? That's a great suggestion. Reminder that we don't necessarily have to go the ADHD LD route, right, for help. So, okay, everybody, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for participating today, all of you, and Dr. Theresa Maitland. Let me just tell you, next Thursday, July 20, we're doing a webinar on practical organization and time management strategies for middle and high schoolers with ADHD. And then on the 26th, Beyond Dyslexia, reading challenges for children with ADHD. We've been focusing increasingly on language disabilities and language processing disorders among children with ADHD, because we're finding that's a tremendous issue. So look forward to seeing you all again, and thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Bye,
Thank you.
Dr. Maitland. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.